I'm Cornwall Council Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources, and this is number 23 out of 23 of the public meetings to discuss our budget for next year and also the challenges we face in the years ahead. Mostly it's going to be a conversation. I want to hear from you as much as possible, but I'm going to start off with a 10-15 minute presentation just to set the scene. The other people here, Neil Kirkland is our Assistant Head of Finance. He's here to answer all the questions that I can't. We've already discovered some of the questions he didn't know the answer to, so we're well primed, but if you come up with something new, that would be great. Sarah Sims is at the back. She's Community Network Manager. She is going to take copious notes because we want to make sure that everything that you might say to us, everything that everybody has said at all these public meetings, what we've received by email, what we've heard from our staff, anything that comes to us is passed on to all our councillors so that when they come to take the decision on the budget, they know what the people of Cornwall are saying. We take responsibility for the budget, but we think we should be doing it on the basis of what the people of Cornwall think. So, I'll start off. This slide shows roughly where our money comes from and what we spend it on. So this inner wheel here shows the money that comes in. This grey segment, just over a quarter of our budget, is the grant we get from central government, which at the moment is £306 million a year. This black segment, just under a quarter of our budget, is council tax. It's about £220 million a year. The rest of it is a range of grants, fees and charges, including a lot of money that comes into our bank account and goes straight out again, that we can't affect. It's used to fund things like schools or our maintained schools and benefits. We administer on behalf of the government a range of benefits, including housing benefit, that we really can't alter. So that money comes in, goes out. Overall, our gross expenditure is about £1.167 billion a year. So obviously, we're a very large organisation. The purple discs around the outside, roughly to scale, show where we spend the money. So the biggest single spending area is children's schools and families. And that includes all the money that funds our schools, and that comes straight in, goes straight out again, as I said. Second biggest is adult care, health and wellbeing, about £218 million a year. That's our work with older people, vulnerable people, people with physical or learning disabilities, and our public health work. Next up is benefits, £189 million a year. That, as I said, mostly is money that comes straight in, goes straight out again. Next, the Environment Directorate, about £160 million a year. That's roads, parking, the environment and waste services, and also Newquay Airport. Next up, this blob here is basically is everything we couldn't fit into any other logical category. But it includes all our capital financing, all the building work that we do, all the properties work, we borrow money for, and we have to pay it back like a mortgage. So all the funding of that comes from that budget. But it also includes our contingency budget and most of our back office services like finance, legal, democratic services and so on. Then these smaller discs here, community safety and public protection, including training standards, environmental health and the fire service, about £33 million a year. Planning and housing, £22 million. Economic development and culture, £7 million. Face-to-face, including libraries and one-stop shops, £5 million a year. And the leisure service, £4 million a year. Now, over the last 4 years, we've saved about £170 million. And we did so in those 4 stages. So in the first year, on the left, we saved over half the amount we needed to in total, with smaller amounts each subsequent year. And next year, we've already planned to save £19 million. We know how we're going to do that. Now, that programme, we've saved about 170 million. Most of that money came from efficiencies and back office services and changing the way we deliver our services. So whatever you might have thought of the decision to change to a unitary council, one Cornwall from 6 districts in the county, it saved a lot of money. We've got rid of a lot of duplication. So instead of having 7 chief executives, we've got 1. Instead of having 7 payroll systems, we've got 1. So that saved us money. But we've also changed the way we deliver many of our services. So here in North Cornwall, we used to have a lot of council housing. That's now managed by Cornwall Housing Limited, and they can do the same job cheaper. Most of our leisure services, and clearly not a Camelford Leisure Centre, most of our leisure services now run by Tempus Leisure. And they don't have to pay business rates or VAT. So they can deliver the same service cheaper than we could have managed on our own. More controversially, the partnership with BT to deliver many of our back office functions. They can do the same job cheaper. So of that first £170 million of savings, only 11 million, and it's still a large amount of money, but only 11 million had to come from frontline services. But we've now got another task. We've got to save another £23.9 million next year. And that's for 4 reasons. The first is that there's more...
On top of the 19 million.
On top of the 19 million. There's more demand for our services, particularly services for older people and vulnerable people. And we had relatively good weather this year. We had a good visitor year. Now it's great for the Cornish economy, but we had lots of people who are free bus pass holders who came in and used their bus passes. And we as a council have to reimburse the bus companies for everybody who comes in and uses a bus pass in Cornwall. Now that's put a challenge to us. That's put a strain on our budget. We've also had to pay a pay award to our staff. For the first time in 3 years, it's only 1%, but it's still quite a lot of money. Then the government said that we need to cut another 1% from our budget. So that's money we've got to find that we weren't expecting. And finally, we've changed what we're planning on doing on council tax. Instead of a 5% rise, we're now proposing a rise of just under 2%. We've got to pay the difference there. We'll talk a bit more about council tax later. But all this adds up to a challenge of saving an extra £23.9 million next year. What does it look like moving into the future? Well, this is what we estimate is going to happen to our usable funding streams. I've taken out the schools money and I've taken out benefits because really we can't alter what happens to that money. But these are the funding streams that bring us the money that we do have some choice over. And the key one here is this purple one in the middle, the Revenue Support Grant. That's the grant we get from government. And as you can see, it's a fairly healthy chunk at this end. But as we move forward over the next 4 to 5 years, it's slimming down massively, it's diminishing. So we've got a choice. We can either bring down our entire budget to meet it, or we can try and raise more money in other ways, such as this orange strip at the bottom, other income, fees and charges, the amount we charge for discretionary and some not so discretionary services, everything from how much it costs you to go swimming in one of our swimming pools, how much it costs to use our crematorium, that sort of thing. We could increase the amount of council tax we receive as well. That could bring us in more money. There are other things we don't control so much, but do bring us in money, and we can hope to try to increase it. It's like business rates. We've never set business rates. We've always just collected them on behalf of the government. Up until a couple of years ago, we collected business rates, we passed them up the line to the government, and we got some money back. But the amount of money we got back wasn't really related to the amount of money we sent up. Now the government has changed the rules. We keep half the money that we raise in business rates in Cornwall. So suddenly there's a financial interest as well as what you might describe as a moral interest for Cornwall Council to try to encourage as many businesses to be profitable and to pay business rates in Cornwall. So we can set our policies to try to influence that. We can't do so directly, but we can try to help. We get other grants from the government, including a new one announced for £100,000 today to do more work on integrating our fire service with other blue light services in Cornwall. And then there's the new homes bonus. This is a comparatively small amount, but it's still valuable. That's a reward, some might say a bribe, that we get from the government for building new houses. Some of that money goes to the local enterprise partnership, but some of it comes to Cornwall Council. So it's useful income. But the key here is that purple strip and how much it's diminishing over the next 5 years. Here's the scary slide. This is what we think the shortfall is going to be over the next 5 years. And there's 2 lines on this graph. There's the red line, that's the amount of cash, the amount of funding we think we're going to have over the next 5 years. And as you can see, it's diminishing, and we think it's going to be about £89 million a year less by the end of that 5-year period. That's an estimate. We know what's going to happen next year. We're pretty certain what's going to happen the year after. Beyond that, we have to make an educated guess, and it will depend on what happens at the general election and whatever new government is formed, what they decide to do. But we have to make an estimate based on what we think is most likely to happen and what the current government tells us. So this might change a bit, but we have to plan for the future, and at the moment we think we're going to be about 89 million a year worse off. That's only half the story, because our costs are going to increase. They're going to increase because of extra pressures, what we call demographics. The population is getting older, older people tend to use our services more. But there's also inflation and additional pay awards and so on. So we think that there's going to be an extra pressure on our costs of about £107 million a year by the end of this period. Add the two together and you get a shortfall potentially of about £196 million by the end of that 5-year period. Now, I don't think Cornwall Council can look the same in 5 years' time if this is true. I don't think we can carry on delivering all the range of services that we currently do. I think we're going to have to make a choice, because I want to make sure that what we do well, and we're proud of those services. But the deal is going to have to be this: some other services we're not going to be able to deliver at all. We're going to have to look to other people, town and parish councils, voluntary organisations, charities, perhaps even the private sector, to deliver those services for us. Can they do them cheaper but maintain those services?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
It seems like there's a big emphasis on what's going to happen after 2015/2016. And I noticed 2014-15 it's a real drop. Then it plateaus 2015-2016, and that's when you've got some idea of what you're going to get. You continue declining after that, and presumably after that point you're really not sure what's
We're
going
really
to happen.
not sure enough to put it
But
on
you
there.
sound quite emphatic about the fact that some decisions have got to be made, and the council's going to look very different in 5 years' time. So I'm just questioning your emphasis on how bad it's going to be, given there's very little certainty out of 2 years.
Well, no, there's a reasonable amount of certainty. The Chancellor, when he announced the spending review, indicated that the reductions for the next 4 years would be in line with the reductions over the previous 5 years. The previous 5 years saw 30% reductions, and that's why that line continues down.
But we've got a new government potentially next year.
Who knows?
Yeah,
If there's a new
that indicates not a lot of certainty.
If there's a new government comes in here, then, well, as politics nationally progresses, the clear other alternative government is one involving Labour, if the Labour Party, or indeed if one of the current coalition parties, indicates that they will do something dramatically different, then obviously we have to take account of that. What the Chancellor has said at the moment is that this is about the most likely scenario. If there is alternatives, we will update this. As and when we get to 2015-16, when we get the next comprehensive spending review, that's obviously when we will be able to have certainty either at this or at something else.
I just appreciate a little, I'd appreciate that clarity really about that after the next financial year.
Well,
we really don't know, but at this stage.
We are pretty certain that on the basis of current plans, and the Labour Party has not indicated any desire to say something different at the moment. They may do, but at the moment they've said nothing different. That this is the scenario we face, and we have to, I think, we have to prepare as if this is going to be the case. Now, we're not at the moment, and I'll explain in a bit more detail, we're not at the moment proposing to take decisions which are absolutely fundamentally make or break based on this. But we are preparing as if this is the most likely scenario.
We know for certain that 2015-16 they've issued the numbers, the financial settlement figures for 15-16. So up to that plateau, we know that bit. It's a bit
I just think
after.
that's quite interesting. Immediately we've got a severe drop, I get that, so you need to prepare for that. Then you've got a plateau for the following year, but then you've continued with a drop?
Because the announcement for 15-16 showed a much greater reduction, which is the severe drop, and then when we average it out to the 4 years, that's why there was a plateau.
So, but you're right to question.
Yeah.
Is everything from there onwards absolutely certain? No. Inflation might be less. We might have, from our point of view, better news on pay awards. In other words, not quite so good for our staff. Lower pay awards or some other things, which might mean this blue line goes down a bit as well. So the gap may be less. It may be greater. We don't know. So we'll come back to that in a minute, because I think it is an interesting point. But if that's true, I don't think we can carry on as we are at the moment. I think we have to make a choice about those services we carry on delivering, those we look to others to perhaps deliver for us, but equally some services that I don't think we're going to be able to deliver at all. I think there are going to be some things that we don't do as Cornwall Council. I usually do a allegory at the moment to the film Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I don't know if anybody's seen that. Character in there called the Black Knight, and he challenges them, and all the characters go on. They're basically lopping limbs off him left, right, and centre. But he keeps on saying, "No, it's only a scratch. I'll take you all on you. I'll fight you all." Until there's just the head and the voice left, but he's still saying, "I'll take you on. I'll take you on." And my fear is that if we carry on just as we have been until now, chopping little bits off all our services each year, that's how we'll end up. We won't have anything left. We'll just have the head and the voice. We'll just have County Hall and the councillors. We'll sound like a council, but we won't be able to do anything. So I want to avoid that at all costs. Excuse me. I want to make sure that whatever we end up doing, we do well. Whether it's half the amount we're doing at the moment, whether it's 3/4, whatever. I want to make sure we do it well.
Fairly.
Sorry?
And fairly.
And fairly, indeed.
Let's come to that later.
Now, this is just an example, but if what I've said is true, and the scale of the reductions is that much, the list on the right is the equivalent of the services we can't deliver at all anymore. Now, I'll give you a bit of reassurance. That's just an example. Some of those are statutory services we have to carry on doing. So we're not targeting these services, we're not even placing them first in line for any cuts. It's just to show the equivalent scale of the challenge we're facing. And I don't think we can make those savings, as I said, by salami slicing. Neither can we make them by more efficiencies. We might have saved 170 million over the last 4 years, mainly through efficiencies. But we've been through the unitary process. We've transferred a lot of services out to what being delivered by others. Of course, we will always look to be as efficient as possible. Of course, we will look to preserve frontline services by being pragmatic and seeing whether they can be delivered in other ways. But I don't think that we can save £196 million, or indeed anything like that, depending on what we end up being faced with.
We've already saved 170 there, haven't we?
We've
So
saved-
we're talking about another 196.
Yes, we are. We're talking about another 196
By,
by 5 years.
I thought you'd said 170 had already been saved in 4 years.
Yes?
And I think you said we've got 23.9 to save now,
Yeah,
on top of that 170.
yeah. And then we've got to save another 196 less 23.9. That's the scale of what we're facing. That's the challenge.
If you're right.
If I'm
you're
right. If I'm right, yes.
That's the bit we have
But
to
I
keep
think
remembering.
that's the bit you have to keep remembering. But I think even if everything stops and gets even, I don't think it's going to get better. But even if it stops getting worse beyond where we know that line is, we're still facing challenges of saving another roughly £100 million. That's the scale of what we're facing. The bare minimum, even if everything gets happy and glorious again, is another £100 million. But where we think we are based on what the Chancellor has told us is 196.
Did we lose any money to Iceland?
Sorry?
Did we lose any money in Iceland 5 years ago?
Can I come, it's a perfectly good question, can I come back at the end of the presentation, is that alright? Yeah. So, I don't think we can save it through salami slicing, and I don't think we can just save it through efficiencies. There are going to be some hits to frontline services. I talked about council tax. Now, slightly contrary to what it says on that, over the last 4 years, Cornwall Council's element of council tax hasn't changed. It's only been frozen 3 years, but it hasn't changed for the last 4 years. Based on the challenges we now have, based on the fact the additional pressures on our budget, the increasing demand for our services, the pay award, inflation and so on, the extra cut from the government as well, I don't think it's right to be proposing another council tax freeze. That's why the budget we're proposing now is based on a 2% rise. Actually, it's 1.97%. The reason being that there are a couple of organisations, the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority and the Environment Agency, who can precept onto our budget. They can put their costs on our budget. Now, we don't know precisely what they're going to ask for, so we have to leave ourselves a little bit of wiggle room. That's why we talk about 1.97 rather than 2%. But it's 2% to all intents and purposes. But we're proposing that 2% rise. But we don't have to. We can have a debate about that. Some people are arguing we should go for another year of freeze. Now, if we do, we will get some help from the government. The government will provide us with another freeze grant to mitigate some of the effects. But it's only 1% and it's only for 1 year. And next year, in addition to that £23.9 million, we would have to find another £2 to £2.5 million of savings if we went for a council tax freeze. But of course, you and the people of Cornwall wouldn't be having to pay any more money towards the Cornwall Council element of your council tax. We could also go the other way. We could increase council tax by more than 2%. Some people have talked about 5% as an example. Now, if we did that, you would be paying more on your council tax, but we wouldn't have to make so many cuts. Instead of 23.9 million pounds, we would only have to make about 17 million pounds of cuts. But that's still 17 million pounds of cuts. So at the first meeting ahead of these, somebody said, I don't want to make any cuts at all. How much would we have to raise council tax in order to not make any cuts at all next year? And the answer is about 19%. About £240 on a Band D property. So it's got a certain logic to it, but as Sir Humphrey might say, it's the courageous choice. Now, at the end of the meeting, I'm going to have a straw poll. I've been doing this at every single one of these meetings, to ask you, based on your own thoughts, based on what you've heard today, what you think we should be doing as Cornwall Council on council tax next year. So if you can bear that in mind.
Don't you have to have a referendum if you
Good point, and I've forgotten that. Sorry, it's the first time I've forgotten that. Yeah, any rise above 2% would need to be approved by the people of Cornwall in a referendum. You can tell it's my last meeting.
And
I've
how
forgotten
much
my
is that
script.
going to cost?
Good question. Yeah, so it needs to go to a referendum, and in order for that budget to carry through, we would need to have a positive vote. Now, that referendum has to take place in May. Normally it would take place on the first Thursday in May, because we've got the European elections next year on the 22nd of May. We think that this referendum would take place on the 22nd of May. It would cost about £920,000. And we have to pay for that. We don't get a grant or anything. So that's a factor to take into account. And if we lose the referendum, we have to rebill everybody at a cost of about £120,000. And then we also have to have an emergency budget to get the cuts down, or the rise in budget down to about 2% or less. So it's a risk. Thank you for the money. But we don't just need to think about cuts. We can also try to think about how we can bring more money into the council. And these are some of the ideas that some people have put forward. Some of them are going to be very controversial. Others perhaps a lot less so. We're not.
Any of these ideas from the consultations that you've had around the county?
These particular ones were dreamt up before when we wrote this presentation, but these are ideas that have been put to us over the last few months. As I said, some will be very controversial, some less so. We're not committed to any of them. But what we are saying is actually at the moment we can't afford to categorically rule anything out. So one of the questions I've got for you
So
is...
what's your name?
Alex, thanks.
Alex. I just have to say to you, you keep talking like this is inevitable and it is going to be as bad as you're saying it's going to be. And I say in 2 years' time, you don't have that kind of certainty. So I'm asking you to just please bear that in mind in how you're speaking.
No, I am absolutely certain that in 2 years' time we will have had to make absolutely fundamental changes to Cornwall Council and cut huge amounts of money. Beyond that, there is some uncertainty. I'll grant you that absolutely. But these are things we have to start planning now. My view is, if we sit here knowing that we've got to make massive cuts for the next 2 years, but hoping things might get better after that, if we do that, actually
I'm not saying get better, but I'm just not expecting it to be quite as drastic as you are suggesting. And it feels like this isn't a consultation, this feels like an agenda that you have and you are getting our feedback to fit your agenda. That's how it's feeling, rather than a consultation process.
Well, the views you have are welcome to us, and if you think differently, then by all means say so, because we are listening to that. So if you let me finish this, and then we'll go through. I just want to make it clear that we're not committed to any of these, but what I want to understand from you is what you think we might be able to do to increase our funding, which hopefully people will think, come what may, is a good thing. What people think is a good idea to increase our funding. Even if you're not thinking about those, what other ideas do you have? We can also look to cut our costs. These are some of the ideas, again, not determined, not things we're committed to. These are some of the ideas people have put forward as to how we might cut our costs. These are mainly service areas, but you may have other ideas about how we could cut our costs which don't involve services. Again, we dreamt up this list before we started these consultations, but just about every single one of these has been put to us by somebody or other during the consultation process. So what do you think about this? Or indeed, what other ideas could you come up with to reduce our costs?
The reduced bus subsidies, is it compulsory from people from the other counties to come into Cornwall on free bus passes? Or can you start cutting that back? Because I use the park and riding through, and I don't mind, I'm a pensioner, I don't mind paying that bit of money to come in and out through, because you're parking over the town and it's safer and you can go in and out without any problems. Is there any way that you can stop people out of the county coming in free? Sadly, or can you make them pay so much?
Sadly, the answer is no.
You can't.
It's a national scheme. Legally, we have to give a free bus pass to anybody who qualifies over a certain age or with a certain time.
So we're really getting a lot of people coming in.
And this is part of the problem that we're facing at the moment, because we then have to give them free local bus travel. Actually, the park and ride is one you have to pay for because it's not covered, because it's a special service. As is some of the open-top tourist bus type things, but most local bus services. So we've asked the government, would we be allowed to, we're not committed to this, would we be allowed to charge child rate or 50p a journey or ask for donations? And they've said no. So one of the things we're thinking about is saying to people who do hold bus passes, look, if you can't afford to pay, don't pay. You've got the bus pass, use the bus pass. But if you think you can afford to pay, we're saying keep the pass in your pocket every so often, however much it applies to you. And you would then need to pay full adult fare. There's unfortunately no option on that. But however often you feel you can pay, that's an option that's available to you. You don't have to show the bus pass every single time. But that's as far as the law allows us to go at the moment.
Mind you, tourists pay an awful amount of car parking, to the extent a lot are saying they're not going to come back.
And that's the converse argument. That's very true. I don't want to pretend.
Facebook's full of people saying they've paid over £100 parking for the week. It's cheaper to go somewhere else.
Come back to parking in a minute if I can, because I think it's very, very, very. Final two slides. And this is where we get perhaps even more controversial still. If I was thinking purely in terms of the financial best interests of Cornwall Council, I'd want to build as many houses as possible, because they bring in more council tax. We have to provide more services, but the overall net income is slightly greater than the extra cost of those services. But I can't think, and I won't think, just in the financial best interests of Cornwall Council. We need to think about what's right for Cornwall and what's right for the communities in Cornwall. Similarly with supermarkets, out-of-town shopping centres. They bring in lots of business rates. They bring in Section 106 planning gate. That's great, but they have a direct impact pretty immediately on local shops and businesses. So we have to think about what's good for the whole of Cornwall. That's why we're at the moment discussing a local plan. We call it a local plan, that it covers the whole of Cornwall. So we need to think about how many houses, how many other sorts of development we might want over the next 20 years, and where they should be. And that's a consultation that's happening at the moment, that all councillors and indeed all communities can feed into. I don't know if Camelford's getting a neighbourhood plan? Yeah? Okay. Well, that's an extra control. Once that goes through, that not just sets how many houses or other types of development will get in the Camelford area, but where they will go, and perhaps more importantly, where they will not be allowed to go within the area. So that's a crucial level of control that will form part of the sort of subsidiary documents of the local plan. And the same thing actually with wind turbines and solar farms as well. We need to think, and obviously there's a very controversial application in this area, which I really don't want to get into, but you know, we have to think about what number of wind turbines and solar farms is right for Cornwall, and where they should go and where they should not go. And that's part of the local plan discussion. So I'd prefer not to get into the precise details of housing numbers or solar farms or supermarkets or whatever tonight, but just to make sure you're aware that those discussions are happening, and that you should, through Rob and through the town council and through any other Cornwall councillors in the area, talk to them about what you think should go in the local plan for this area. Okay? So, done that one. So we discuss where the background is and where we think we're going to be in the next 5 years, although I fully accept that there is some uncertainty to it.
We haven't discussed, you've presented.
I've presented to you where I think we're going to be. What I want to know from you is where you think we should be trying to save money, what services you would be prepared to see go, what services you think we should be trying to preserve at all costs, how we can bring extra income into Cornwall Council to balance the books and preserve services, and where you think we can save money that doesn't involve cutting services. Now, a couple of points have already been made, which I'll answer. One is about Icelandic banks.
Yeah.
Cornwall County Council and Cornwall Borough Council had investments totaling 9 million. One had 4 million, one had 5 million.
So there was a bit, not a lot in real terms.
No, but it's still more cash than I'm going to have in my bank.
Yeah.
So yeah, they invested those. We are, now I have to be slightly careful here because there's a legal issue surrounding a current negotiation which I'm not allowed to talk about.
That's fair enough.
But we've already got some money back, and I would anticipate getting a lot more back, perhaps as much as we could ever expect to get back very shortly. So it was a problem. It's becoming increasingly less of a problem, and I'm afraid that's as much as...
No, that's fair enough. I got made redundant from Sir James Smith's that year, and I put mine in an Icelandic bank, but fortunately one of the ones covered by the government. So I know how... As
an individual investor, you would have got your money back quicker than us as
I got mine back by
institution.
Christmas, so...
Yeah. Okay.
But I've got a couple of questions.
Can I answer the parking one
Oh,
as
yes.
well?
Yeah.
Because that's another very fair point. I think that Cornwall Council has had its parking strategy wrong for ages. First of all, we started off with a unitary authority, it must be the same everywhere, and I think that was wrong.
Kilbleston town centre.
That's where I'm from. So, the second thing they did is they had a sort of model, computer says no type model, which tried to assume that if we there's a fixed number of people who use our car parks, and if we put the prices up, automatically people will pay them, which is absolutely
Just parks all over town.
So what we've proved in Lordson, and what I think we can roll out elsewhere, is that actually, in certain circumstances, if you cut prices, you get so many more people using the car park that the council doesn't lose out, but more fundamentally, you get greater footfall in the shops and the businesses in the town, so it's better for everybody. We've proved it with season ticket prices. We've now got some trials happening this autumn and over Christmas and into the new year.
Because when the idea of the season ticket prices and all, you could sell a handful, couldn't you?
It went up from £195 a year to £470. We went from selling about 100 to selling 25. Bonkers.
Yeah.
Now we've put it back down to £200. We're selling about 130. I think we can do a bit better still. But so many people aren't parking in front of other people's driveways, and all this thing that causes me no end of casework problems. But I think we've, as a council, we've got the message. One of the things that I was most keen on through the last year, well, for the last 4 years, but I've actually had some power to do something over the last few months, is changing that. Because I think we just got it wrong, and we affect visitors, we affect locals, we particularly affect commuters, particularly those who aren't on much more than minimum wage.
Especially in areas where there's no public transport. Can I come back to my point of fairness? I'm sorry if I've done
That's
this
all right,
minute.
and we've done the two that we mentioned before. Yeah.
How much do you use the LSA data, the deprivation data? Because you said earlier that you were proud of services in Cornwall. A quarter of the bottom 35,000 approximately LSLAs, a quarter of the bottom 25 of 35,000 of those are in North Cornwall for access to services and housing. So, if you would you like to explain to people what I'm talking about?
A load of data, a lot of census data, but also a lot of other data, gets split into little geographic areas. Now, unfortunately, they don't exactly match up with, for instance, local government boundaries.
34,582 of them.
They're called lower super output areas, which, hey, I don't know why they were called that, but they are. And for instance, in my part of Lawson, there are 2.5 of them, and they're about 2,000 people each, 1,500, 2,000 people in each one. And one of the things that they look at is things like deprivation. They also look at access to certain services. And in Cornwall, we have pockets of very extreme deprivation, and they're in certain categories, mainly access to certain services. There is a huge amount of deprivation in North Cornwall, including in London, including in
the problem I've come is the briefing notes to your councillors and things talk about the global 20%, and they don't break it down. So you're talking about cutting services for areas of the country that are in the bottom 1% of the country for access to services, which is why I was talking about fairness. You could cut a library. Okay, shut your library 2 days a week and use those people out in the rural areas, rather than just saying, right, we'll cut the rural libraries.
I think
you need a bit of sideways thinking that you've got all those services concentrated down in the south of the county. Half the time we feel forgotten about up here. When the roadshow for the One Cornwall came, we didn't even get a ballot. They forgot about us, and they didn't even send the roadshow to you. Somebody down there thought it was in Devon.
I understand. I empathise completely. I agree with what you're saying. I think that whether it's true or not, and I think there's certainly a degree of truth in it. Whether it's true or not, there has been a belief that there's too much concentration on mid and west Cornwall. Actually, not Penzance and St Ives or the Lizard.
There's more shops at Penzance High Street than there is in the whole of North Cornwall. It's true. But
let's not be dissing other areas, but There is certainly a truth in the fact that East Cornwall, including South East Cornwall, has been I don't believe has got a fair share.
Neglected, I think.
Neglected is a fair idea. And we're determined to make it equitable. Now that equitable doesn't mean equal, doesn't mean exactly equal, but it does mean equitable for shares of investment. We've seen these.
But aren't you ashamed that we're in the bottom 1% up
Absolutely.
here? And slashing services more for up here is only going to make it worse.
Yeah. I mean, we're not.
Which is why I'm saying about fairness.
Yeah.
And if you're going to cut services, maybe you need to cut and reallocate to other areas.
I understand the point you make. We need to make sure that we, where we are cutting services, we have a clear and consistent message that justifies why we're cutting services in a particular area, and we need to make sure that we go some way towards redressing the balance of the inequity that's happened over the last few years. Well, more than the last few years.
This briefing note to the councillors does not mention this is the one 14th of January 2013 on deprivation. Just doesn't mention that North Cornwall is so badly off for services, and these are the people taking the votes on the actual cuts in services.
We are getting, to be honest, we're getting more data from the 2011 census all the time, which allows us to get more information about things like deprivation. And there'll be an update to that.
I had to threaten them with a data freedom of information request. When I sent a request 4 years ago on what use they make of this data, I got stonewalled and stonewalled and stonewalled, and I said I'll put a data freedom of information request in at this rate, and basically nothing.
We will get more. We will just to answer the question. We will get more information through, and what we are determined since May, since the new council was elected, we are determined to make sure that we are as equitable as possible, and we've got to recognise the inequity that's happened over the last few years. Yes. Can I get your name, please? Sorry.
Ellen Hall. Let me start out by saying that I understand that you're presented with a bunch of numbers and you have somehow got to steer a course through them. But I feel like what we're being presented with is that exercise where you're in a lifeboat and there's a
Who do you chuck out
there's
first?
a pregnant woman, who you're going to throw out of the boat because there isn't enough room. So I feel like you've come here and you've asked us who are you going to throw out of the boat. What services are we going to cut? You're going to cut libraries. Libraries are, if, nobody will die if you cut the libraries. Unfortunately, education and culture will die. Nobody will die if you close the leisure center, except that some spirits will die, and some of the life in people's lives will die. All of this matters. So when you say, I want to be sure that we do that what's left we can do well, I get very nervous, because what I hear you saying is, let's cut it down to the bare minimum and do that well, at which point the libraries die and the leisure centers die and the transportation dies, but by God we're doing the parking lots well, or whatever is left. My own feeling as an alternative is, how much can we get through? How much of the infrastructure of this country can be held together until better times come? And I think that's probably a more useful way to look at it. It is subtle, but you may be able to tell from the accent that I'm not originally from here.
Have you weird things?
But God help you, I'm a citizen and I voted.
That's right.
So, it
Probably
seems,
more than a lot of people do.
it seems to me that the most important thing that can be done in this time is to raise tax, especially on the people who can afford to pay it. I don't know, because I don't know how the county taxes work, whether they can be raised differentially.
Sadly, no. We have a banded council tax system with 8 bands, 9 bands now. We can't add new bands on, and each band must rise by the same percentage, and they're all fixed rate bands, but proportionate bands. So if we raise band A by 5%, say, we have to raise band D by 5% and raise band H by 5%. So it's all exactly the same. We can't differentiate like that. There's no rich tax, for want of better words, that we can impose.
That is unfortunate.
What about holiday homes? Because of the scope there?
Second homes.
Yeah, second homes. Yeah.
Up until a couple of years ago, we had to give a discount of at least 10% to second homes on council tax. We, alongside many others, campaigned for the right to charge full rate. And the government listened to us and the government changed the laws, and we can now charge full rate for council tax for second homes. And this year we have done, for the first year, we have charged full rate on second homes. We have also asked the government, we're not committed to doing this, we've asked the government though, could we charge a premium?
Yeah.
They've said no. We've said, could we require change of use planning permission when a main family home, for whatever reason, becomes a second home? They've said no. So at the moment, I believe we're acting to the full extent of what we're allowed to do. That doesn't mean we won't carry on asking the government, and that doesn't mean that we won't be looking for bright ideas of what else we might do. So if you've got any ideas there...
And asking the population to ask the government.
Indeed, indeed. But that's where we are at the moment. So we're doing as much as we're allowed to do. But I think the fundamental point you make is, can we survive in the hope of better times or less bad times? Well, we can. The reason I wouldn't propose cutting libraries or leisure, apart from the fact I think they're both great services and they add exactly as you suggest, is because actually they wouldn't raise enough money.
Yeah.
It's a, you know, if you from the slide at the start, if you add the 4 million the total for leisure to the 5 million the total for all of the face-to-face services, which includes libraries, we get 9 million. And whatever your view of the future, we've got to save 23.9 million next year. So we do need to look further than that. And my personal view is both of those are very efficient services. Any cuts we make to those automatically hit the frontline service. So I'm not saying we won't make any savings there or little bits of savings there, but they're not the answer to our budget woes.
Well, what always seems to happen when governments have to save money is that they cut services to the poorest people because they're the people with the least power, and that's the easiest to do. And I cynically think that's probably what's going to happen again, and it's the last thing on earth we should be doing. If you seriously want to go through an entire governmental structure and find out where to save money, go to the people at the bottom who work and are served by these services and ask them what gets in, what gets in the way of you doing your job, where's the duplication, what could we change to make this more efficient without cutting services, and you may actually get some answers.
I have to say, we've already asked our staff a couple of times on that, and we asked them as part of that first 170 mil batch, and they came up with some good ideas, as well as making sacrifices themselves. And we've asked them again as part of this exercise, and we've got a huge number of responses. Now, some of them are of the inevitable sack my boss, he's crap type stuff, which may or may not be true, but isn't really the long-term answer. But others will be little bits within their own office for how they can make things more efficient. Now that's welcome. We've passed those on to try and make sure they happen where they're feasible. Others are more fundamental restructures of services, and we're looking to make those happen because, exactly as you say, there are inefficiencies. There are also services that people have said quite candidly, I work in this service and I deliver this frontline service, and you know what, I don't think it's working. And that's valuable information to us. Now, in a way, you're the last of the 23 public meetings, so we've made the same presentation, and we've had more information in since we started this process, including a lot of stuff that we've already looked at and we're thinking that we're going to do. But we wanted to make sure we gave the same presentation to everybody so that we got the same, a balanced feedback from everybody. But there are things that we've already looked at which we're thinking, here's where we can save some money, based on asking our staff and indeed service users as well. Because we want to hear from them what they rely on and what they think This is a service I received, but to be honest, it's not up to scratch, so we've had some of that as well. Good. I'm going to take one minute. Gents at the back, then over there.
Yeah, sure. Several things I'd like to sort of put some comments on. A is the planning department and such. You said you might contemplate charging for advice, and that's always is the case at the moment. I personally noticed that we asked for a planning application, shall we say, advice on a do we need it, don't we need it, planning application, and the response was, you send us 30 quid and we'll tell you. Now that's a local authority to a local authority, which is a bit naughty in one respect. It's all public money going in that way. And my concern about your housing bonus system, you become judge and jury on the quality and quantity of houses in the county. We know full well the county is going to burst at the seams before long with housing, because we've got the 20,000 plan, and also your wind energy program or your renewable energy program. Far in at the moment, I believe we are taking in more than we are requested to. We're making more than we requested to, and we've still got dozens and dozens of turbines on the planning books. I mean, you are killing the egg, the golden egg, basically. People come to the southwest to look at the views they haven't got in London, Birmingham, Bradford, wherever. And they come to the open vistas, and every time, every which way you look now, there's a turbine in place. And it's getting worse and worse. Dorset hasn't got any. Why is that, I wonder?
I think the points you make are very valid. That's part of the discussion of the local plan to understand.
My other concern was transport. It's the major cost for 90% of the population of Cornwall. Getting to work, getting from work, and when you get there, where do you stick the damn thing? And we get a complete county of unemployed people because they can't afford to get to work. Now, the bus services in Camelford are under review. From Camelford to Bodmin, there's a strong possibility that won't be existing. How do the people in Camelford get to work in Bodmin, and all the hospital, and all the only decent supermarket, without a bus? You know, so you're saying you've got to cut services.
It's a minimum wage.
Yeah, you know, you've got a basic minimum wage. So that is really a major fundamental lifestyle of Camelford, and everybody has got one car in the family, if not two.
To make you report to the job centre every day, you try to get there.
Absolutely. This, I think that public transport, one of the draft initial proposals that we had was on public transport. Now, my view is that there are parts of Cornwall which are, I mean, in comparison to London or a city, it's all terrible. But but in comparison to Camelford or Lansing, there are bits of Cornwall which are better served, but there are huge parts of Cornwall, mainly the Lizard and the area around there, and North Cornwall, which have pretty awful public transport, and we rely on those buses that we still have. And we need to make sure. Now, one of the things we're doing next year is retendering the supported bus network, those that the council pays to support. The reason we're doing that is half of the local schools contract is up, and by combining the two, by retendering them at the same time,
bus route and school times run together,
we can save money, and therefore hopefully preserve many services that might be under threat as a result. So that's happening next year. And as part of that, we need to understand what services, apart from the data we get from the bus operators and so on, and we need to understand what services are really required, and even more importantly, at what times during the day. Is this a service that people rely on to get into and out of work? Is this a service that people rely on to go shopping, for example, in which case the timing is less important? But this is all the stuff that we need to be looking at.
You could look at the length of time they've got there when they get there.
Exactly. That's
one or two buses around here where you've practically got time to go for a wee, and then you've got to get back on the bus.
You end up with either 5 minutes or 9 hours and nothing in between. But the other thing we've got to do, and it may affect you here, but it certainly affects us in Lansing, is the last time we scored all these bus routes and to decide how valuable they were, we failed to take account of any bus route that crossed over the border into England. So a bus from Launceston to Plymouth, for example, was rated as not one worth supporting because it didn't support the service. Of course it supports Cornwall. Of course it supports people who go to the hospital in Derriford or who go to work in Plymouth and all the places along the route. So we need to be smarter about that. This is part of the discrimination against the issue as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I hear what you say about public transport, about needing to protect that. Yeah, okay. Right.
Yes, I've got about 4 things really, but the first one, long term, you've got 5 MPs, you've got 40 people running Wales, or like 6 MPs, I don't count one of them.
I won't ask which one.
You've got
hopefully not this one here. But
you've got 40 people running Wales. You can't do anything until the next election. But talking to one of our 3 councillors, and I'm not saying which one, he says he can handle all 3 areas. Now, if that's the case, you could cut your councillors by 2/3. So that's one thing, but that's long term and looking to the
Let me
future.
answer that. We will come back to the rest of the points. We don't have. I don't think we can cut them by 2/3, but I think that my personal view is actually I think we can cut them by 1/3 at least, maybe half. But we don't have the power to do that. That's something that the Boundary Commission does. They have to come in and decide on the number of councillors that Cornwall should have, and they would normally come every 10 to 12 years. They were last here finishing work 4 years ago. We would normally see them in another 6 to 8 years. We can write to them and ask them to come early if that's what we want to do, but there's no guarantee that they would do so. So it is something that I think my personal view is a reasonable thing to suggest, but that's not the council view, that's my personal view. But there's no guarantee that they would come. And to be honest as well, the amount of money it would save is pretty tiny. But
Well,
that doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
Yeah, I think the other issue on that is financial savings are not a reason that they will recognise to do it.
Every little helps us.
Well, yeah, but
If
they
they
will
did-
ignore that reason.
Yeah.
They will say
If
that's
they
not
came
a
and
valid
did it.
reason.
If they came and did it, that's one thing. But we can't rely on that happening. We can't commission that to happen. Anyway,
As
so
far as I'm concerned, it can correct me if I'm wrong, since the unitary authority has been in being, you haven't got rid of any managers whatsoever, and your manager are costing you around about 5 million a year with their cars and their salaries over 100,000 and what have you. Now, if your departments are shrinking and you cut at the bottom end, you're going to end up with all chiefs and no Indians, so to speak.
that's not quite.
So you know, your chief executive, 200,000 and what have you, and if you're shrinking all the time, surely you can do what the BBC is doing, and you can amalgamate the departments and take a manager away.
Yeah, absolutely fair point. We have done quite a lot of that already. In 2009, when Cornwall Council was founded, we had 30 members of staff paid £100,000 or more. We've now got 9. We've shrunk down throughout the top tiers of management as well as at the bottom as well. That's not to say we couldn't go further. One of the things we've done as well is you'll have seen that our chief exec has left and gone to New Zealand. He keeps coming back, which is a bit worrying. But when we re-advertised his job, instead of on a scale of 180 to £200,000, we looked at a report that said that we could reduce it by 10%, and new chief execs were being appointed at an average of 10% less. So we reduced the scale by 12%. We went a bit further. That's still a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but we have reduced that. And as and when any directors or heads of service, which are the next 2 layers in the management chain, when they leave, we'll reduce, if we choose to replace them, we'll replace them on salaries of about 12% less as well. But what you said is, could we amalgamate departments? What we're actually wanting to do is amalgamate 2 departments. And then I think in the medium term, I think we could look to another 2 departments and amalgamating them. Now that won't affect the front line, but what it does is it affects the top tiers of management. It doesn't save a huge amount, but it, as you said, every little helps.
And why do you have to keep spending money on consultants because if your councillors or your officers are not up to it, they should be. They shouldn't have to go to, you know, you don't reinvent the wheel every time you want to do something. And local government's been in being now for 100 years or more, that, you know, consultants, all they're doing is picking your brains and putting in a report.
There's a combined area of spending consultants and agency staff, and in both areas I've been hugely concerned about how much we spent on both of them. I don't think, you may disagree with me, I don't think that we can reduce either to zero, because I think that in certain circumstances there is a good case for having either. You talk about consultants, but I'll mention agency staff first. There are going to be times when we need somebody as sickness cover for essential services, social workers and so on. There's also going to be times, mainly when we send out the council tax bills, for example, when there's a massive spike in calls to our call centre, and we just can't cope with it except by getting in agency staff, properly trained and so on, but we only want them for a very short period of time. So it's not worth having even short-term contract staff. We get them in, and as soon as the spike falls off, we can get rid of them again with no cost, because they're agency staff. They cost a bit more, but that's worth, in certain circumstances, having agency staff. It's also worth having the ability to get consultants for certain reasons. In the consultants budget, we include things like expert lawyers. Now, we've got a legal department which can cope with virtually everything a council would normally deal with. But every so often we need an expert in, for example, railway law. Now, railway law is a very specialist field, and railway lawyers cost a lot. But if you only want them for a couple of hours, maybe even as much as a day, they're going to charge you the earth for an hourly rate. But it's not worth having one on staff, because they'll cost us huge amounts. So it is worth occasionally buying an hour or a day of a consultant's time to get that expert advice, but only for a very short period of time. What we shouldn't be doing is having people who are consultants being paid £1,000 or more a day for 18 months, which is the situation we've had in the past. So, as I said, I was concerned about that. What we've done is we've seen the average combined agency and consultancy bill, which was about £1.1 million a month. It's now down to about £650,000 a month. I still think it's way too high, but we need, although there'll be little peaks and troughs, it needs to keep on coming down. But it's never going to come down to zero, but it does need to keep on coming down.
One more.
Yep.
How much in your reserves have you got? How much have you spent since the unitary authority's been in being? I've asked the question how much you've spent west, middle and north, and they can't answer that one, or they don't want to answer that one, because I said the millions and millions and millions of pounds they put into Redbridge and Camelford, and they're still out of work down there, and the money's been spent wrongly. And I told the woman from Australia when she first came here, unless you spent it on infrastructure, it was going down a black hole, which has been proved right after 20 years. But how much money? Because the rainy day is here now, isn't it? You're after quick fixes. You're not looking long term, you're after quick fixes, because them up there have decided you ain't getting so much. And what's happened with the rates? Somebody said now that the business rates, we get some, because at one time it all went to Whitehall, absent landlords. You know, and Cornwall suffered for years from absent landlords, doesn't it?
As I said at the start, business rates, we used to send it all to London, we got something back, but it wasn't related to what we sent up. Now we keep half the amount that we raise in business rates. They've cut another budget in order to cope with it, so we're not better off, but
they've robbed people to pay for.
But at least it's reflective of what we send in. Reserves. We hold reserves for other people, like schools. We also have to hold reserves for things like PFI projects. So there's a whole range of things which are classed as reserves that we cannot touch. But the usable reserves, the second slide I showed you, where we saved the 170 million over 4 years, we saved in effect too much in the first year. And we did that deliberately, and we stuck a load in the bank in order to use it to balance the budget for the next 4 years. So we are planning on using £17 million of reserves for next year to balance the budget. Okay? That will leave us with about £38 million in reserves, which is of course a lot of money. But in comparison to our overall budget, it's like saying a family with an average income for Cornwall, or above average income, let's say £25,000 a year, having 500 quid put aside to cope with the car breaking down or the boiler giving up or whatever. Can't get a boiler for £500, but you understand what I mean. We don't have as much as that £500 in comparison in the bank. But we hold that money because of the risk of things happening that we need to lay out a lot of cash on very quickly. Things like flooding, exactly. So we need to judge how much court cases and things like that as well. So we will judge each year how much we think we need in the bank in reserves. If you want to argue about 1 or 2 million of that 38 million, that's a fair argument, but I wouldn't go any further than that because I think we're putting ourselves at unacceptable risk. And of course, once we've spent it, we don't have it anymore. So we're now facing a cut every year moving forward. So if you want to debate using £1 million or 2 million, so be it, but I don't see it as the answer.
Have you cut housing allowance? Because the government has now told you to cut the housing allowance. I know that the housing allowances are not the same here as they are in London, but you must have saved some money because you're not doling out so much.
No, that housing benefit, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, that we get funded for that by the government, so we get funded as much as we pay out, basically.
That's that first large sector.
Yeah.
So all you do is administer.
All we do is administer, we don't set policy.
Do you get any income for administering it, or?
Yes, there is a grant. We roughly half of our cost of the revenue and benefit service. There's a specific grant.
So they do pay you for acting as an agent.
But that's a good example. That will disappear with the universal credit.
Yeah.
So that grant will disappear, as will the service will transfer
so
to
presumably the people working on that will.
Some will go off and administer universal credit, and some will be lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take the gent over there and then you, if that's okay. Your name, sir?
Yeah, Peter Steve from the Boss Council. One of the things, I've been listening with rapt attention to your presentation. One of the words that you used very, very sparingly, twice in fact, was efficiency. Now, this may be because I know efficiency is a dirty word in Cornwall Council for historical reasons, and it goes back to the day that it was decided undemocratically to have a unitary council. And then inevitably there was a 2 or 3 year lapse before the individual councils could be amalgamated under one roof. During that time, anybody who had something about them and could get another job did exactly that because they didn't know whether they would have a job in 2 years' time or not. And they still had to pay the mortgage and feed the family, the whole lot. Which meant, by definition, that the people who were left to be absorbed into this unitary thing were not the top rate by and large. Which means to say that there was a lack of efficiency which manifested itself and still does to a certain extent, but I think gradually over the years it's going to become less manifest as the brighter lads who are there can make their way to the top. So that maybe your prediction that all was doom and gloom and the costs were going up and the income was going down and all that sort of thing might not actually happen because you might get 1 or 2 efficient people coming to the top. Now, when one thinks in terms of inefficiency, the most glaring example, of course, is Cornwall, which is the most inefficient body of layabouts that it's possible to imagine. I hope there's no one here from Cornwall. There is actually. But they have actually put in writing to me that they don't believe in tendering. It's a waste of time and money. So God knows how anyone controls them. And is Tom Flanagan still? Well, he's not. But at one time, Flanagan was in charge of Paul Allen. So Flanagan and Allen in charge of Cornwall. Fantastic. Said it all. So that's one area where I feel sure enormous savings can be made. In Boscastle, the B263 has been closed for a total of 8 weeks while they tried to drain it. Unlike any farmer or anyone who's had anything to drain, they started at the top rather than the bottom. And anyone who knows anything about draining, I'm not expecting you to do, but you actually started drainaging at the bottom, so you're not working in a lake all the time. But Cornwall did it the other way. They've only just finished, actually. They started 5 years ago. Inefficient or what? The other thing, of course, is Newquay Airport. Now, in The Guardian today, I think I read, only Kurt went through it quickly, but I think they're expecting to lose something like £400,000 this year. Why is Cornwall Council, bearing in mind what I've said about efficiency, trying to run an airport, for God's sake? There's no expertise, is there? You know, why don't they get shot at the thing? I'm sure that Ryanair or something used to run an airport of their own and would pay good money for it. But we wouldn't have to lose £500,000 a year.
Okay. You raised a couple of, well, 3 key issues. There is clearly something right about what you say, but I don't believe that every single good member of staff got a new job when they could.
By and large,
I don't. No, I appreciate that's what you said. I don't actually believe that was the case. I do accept, however, that there may well have been, in this closed room with nobody taking notes, that there may well have been some staff who were less than supremely efficient, who were part of the council at the start, and clearly the programme of losing £170 million worth of costs has seen us drive a lot of inefficiencies out of the council, including many of those people who may not have been the most efficient people in the world. I don't pretend that we are as supremely efficient as we want to be at the moment. There is still some way to go. I think we've done a lot of the work, but there are still things that we need to do. I think one of the things that we have done that is exactly right is we have set Cormac up in a different way now, which encourages them and enables them to become much more efficient. I think that there are certainly examples that I get everywhere, and I can't pretend to know the details of the scheme you mentioned, you understand that, but there are examples everywhere of things that they might well do much more efficiently. Now, there may be very good reasons why they're doing some of what they're doing in the way that they're doing it, and I'm not a road engineer, I can't understand these things, but there is certainly a perception that they could be more efficient, and I think we've set them up in a way which makes sure that they will be much more efficient. We're also looking to make sure that we get as many businesses as possible, small, large, whatever, through the tendering gateway so that they can bid for work from us, from our public sector partners, whatever. So that we
Cormac thinks that's a waste of time and money.
Well, Cormac doesn't get the choice. What we need to make sure is that there is competition, so that Cornwall Council, because Cormac is an arm's length company now, we get the profit from Cormac, but we don't have to give them the work. We can give other people the work, and we need to get more people on the bidders list, on the suppliers list, so that they can bid for this work.
It's not happening.
It is happening. It is late.
It's not happening visibly.
Okay, I accept that. We had a Meet the Buyer Day in Kingsley Village 3 weeks ago now. We had 400 businesses, not just businesses actually, some charities and voluntary sector organisations that provide services through the door, talking to us, talking to other public sector organisations who commission services, because we want, well, 2 things. We want to get our services as cheaply as possible, but we also want to try and keep as much of the money we pay out within Cornwall as possible. We'd like to employ Cornish companies wherever possible, because we know the money then circulates in the Cornish economy and doesn't go up the line, or less of it goes up the line. So that's our aim. We are helping companies to bid so that there is competition, not just for Cormac, but for all these other businesses out there that have relied on council contracts for too long. And we've got a new procurement team to make sure we get value for money as well. And they'll manage the contracts as they progress. to make sure that we don't get the laziness and the aircraft carrier syndrome where people change the specifications halfway through and suddenly the costs balloon out of all proportion. The final thing you mentioned was Newquay Airport. The true figure isn't, we don't subsidise Newquay Airport to 400,000 or 500,000 a year, we subsidise it to 3.1 million. That is clearly a lot of money. Now,
does that mean that 3.1 million plus 400,000 they've lost? So it's 3.5 million in fact?
No, it's the subsidy. We own and run a company on our behalf, but we own Cornwall Newquay Airport, so whatever their losses are, we have to cover that. So it's 3.1 million is the subsidy at the moment.
And the all comes through it.
Sorry, let me finish it. We estimate that the value of the business that's done through Newquay Airport to the Cornish economy is about £25 million a year or so. We also have to factor in the idea that there's the enterprise zone that we've created because we own the land around it, because we own the airport, that we've been able to attract quite a lot of new businesses, and indeed businesses from up country, which are bringing hundreds of fairly high-paid, high-skilled jobs to Cornwall as a result. So we can have a discussion about Newquay Airport. I don't pretend it's all one way by any means, but we have to factor in all those within it. If somebody came to us and said, we'd like to buy Newquay Airport off you, we'd listen to them. Legally we'd have to, but we would also want to listen to them. We're not getting people coming saying, could we buy this airport off you? It's just, there isn't a market out there for it. What I think we can genuinely hope for is, as the economy picks up, flying's a fairly discretionary thing. As the economy picks up, we can get more routes and we can get more business through there, and the subsidy requirement will go down. Do I think it'll go down to zero? Probably not. But is it worth, if it goes down quite a lot, having an airport that brings in lots of business and lots of tourism to Cornwall? At that stage, I think it very much is. But you're free to have another opinion. But
could I ask how many airports the bloke in charge of Newquay Airport was run before?
I don't know.
Why?
I've never asked him. I don't know.
Why?
We can find out. But
I mean, he's a key bloke, surely.
I believe he came from Cardiff, so I believe at least one.
Was it?
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely. The thing about airports is, in order to become a manager of an airport, you've almost certainly got to have worked in another airport at a very high level because of the civil aviation requirements. It's not a job that is open even to professionals. You've got to have aviation management experience.
every single member of staff at the airport is required there by the Civil Aviation Authority. We don't have a single member of staff
very tight.
single member of staff there more than we legally have to. So yeah, I mean the other thing is now this is in the past and you can decide whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. I suspect I know where you're going to go on this, but we took a huge amount of money off Europe in order to develop the airport, and if we did sell it, we'd have to pay that all back as well, so we have to factor that in. Now,
but only under 15 years, isn't it?
yeah, but we're not there yet. So maybe in a few years' time we could sell it and it would cost us less. But so you know, by all means, have the debate. But you know, it really is a case of I probably wouldn't start from here, but we are here, and actually that puts us in a position where it's in our interest to, without spending too much money, do our best to make the airport as vibrant and I was going to say profitable, but you know what I mean, less subsidy reliant as possible, to try and get more people through it, benefit the Cornish economy. But in the meantime, all those jobs that are there based at the enterprise zone, all of which want to use that runway, are helping the Cornish economy. But I do understand your point on that.
Very few regional airports make money. It's the things that operate around the airport that make the money. Even the stuff they sell in the airport makes the money. The actual, well, I can't tell you how much the likes of Ryanair, well, we actually pay them to fly to our airport. Well, we would do if we used a Ryanair, but it's the stuff that hangs off the airport that makes the money, and our bit is the business zone, the aero hub zone.
Yeah.
which
But if there are no planes flying, it's going to make really...
You could
Well, they are flying.
raise a lot of revenue there by closing the airport and stick on 4,000 houses, which you'd also get a housing bonus scheme for.
Sadly, we can't.
And automatically,
We have a
Reduce the
covenant.
housing
We have a
bill.
covenant with the MOD that we have to keep the runway down.
I know it's the longest one in Britain.
Yeah, second longest in Europe. But no, we have a covenant with the MOD that we're not allowed to
About 80% if you
to
did.
destroy the airport. The airport has to the airstrip has to remain a functioning airstrip. So we can't build solar farms or whatever.
The Antonov.
Sorry?
Isn't it the only one operate the Antonov?
Well, it's got the Antonov has to have somewhere to land at the other end.
No, I mean this country.
I don't know.
it's certainly part of the emergency
Later.
response plan. If any of the main airports we couldn't land them,
Yeah.
they're coming into Newquay.
Yeah. Anyway, yes.
With regards to the airport, you're going to put the tax up to...
The proposal, we charge an airport development fee, as do a number of other airports in the UK, and it's pretty common around the world. It's currently £5. We're proposing to put it up to £10. We think that given the subsidy we pay to support the airport, given that, not exclusively by any means, but air travel is a discretionary item, it's not a basic fundamental part of life. We think that it's right to ask those who we are subsidising to pay a bit more towards that, to reduce the subsidy a little bit. That's the quid pro quo is that the really stupid, horrible £1 drop-off charge will abolish that.
The other thing is as well, on the presentation, one of the suggestions was a tourism tax. That would definitely, we would lose so much as a county, a tourist county, we lose so much money. And with regard to the car park fees, there are some counties, parts of counties, that you can actually buy a ticket and use in every car park.
We have that.
For a week.
We have that.
Right.
We used to have it as NCDC used to have one of
Yes,
those.
that's right.
We have a version of that as Cornwall Council. We don't advertise it enough and it's too expensive, but at least the principle is there. So we need to make it a bit more reasonable, we need to make it more
And to advertise
available.
it more.
The tourist tax, so many people have said to us we ought to look at this, that what we've said is we're not making any commitment whatsoever, but we ought to have a look at what it means. Now, the reassurance I can give you is that we couldn't legally, every version of a tourism tax, whether it's a bed tax or whether it's an entry tax on things like Creeley or whatever, every version of it would require a change in legislation. We couldn't actually do it at the moment anyway, even if we wanted to. But we've said, look, let's have a look at what this means. Let's talk to the visitor industry and understand, once we get past that, no, it'll put us all out of business. But let's understand a bit more about how they might implement it, what it might mean to them, what might be an acceptable level if it did happen. Would 50p a night as a bed tax actually make that much difference? Let's try and understand that. Would it be worth going through? Clearly it would have some impact on the visitor industry, but would it have that much impact? I don't know. The simple answer is I really don't know, but so many people have talked to us about it that I think we have to have a look at it. I suspect the answer is possibly going to be no, but I think we owe it to everybody that we look at everything.
Oh, they're quite prevalent in Europe.
Yeah.
We
Yes.
just don't know.
Yes, yeah.
We just don't know it's there.
Yeah.
The other thing, if you stop grass cutting and things like that, surely that's just going to save peanuts.
It all adds up is the answer.
The problem is, if you cut it and you pass it on to parish and town councils, they've got to pay for it. So they've got to put their precept up. So at the end of the day, council tax will still go up.
Yeah, and I don't want to be in a situation where we're going around going, we've frozen council tax, and everybody's going, yeah, but my overall bill has gone up, because they then think we're less credible. And I think that's wrong, because there are situations where towns and parishes have had stuff dumped on them, grip bins, for example.
Yeah.
And the word I'm not allowed to use, public toilets. But I think in reality there are going to be two versions of devolution in the future. There are going to be some services that we are going to say, as Cornwall Council, we just can't afford and we're not going to provide these anymore. And for fairness, that will have to be across Cornwall completely. So that if they're provided locally in Camelford or wherever at all, that's because Camelford Town Council has chosen to take them on and is paying for them entirely. So there's no issue of double taxation there. You'll only get it if the local council takes it on. It's unfair if we cut it in Camelford, but we still provide it in Truro. That's a double taxation. The other one, the other version of devolution is where we actually talk to you and say, can you deliver this service for us cheaper than we can do it? And we'll give you a grant to cover the costs. So that the service carries on. It doesn't come out of your precept because we're giving you a grant to cover it. But you can provide it cheaper than we could, and heaven forfend, maybe even better than we could, although I can't believe that Cornwall Council could ever do it.
Do you think we could?
Also,
yeah, there are examples where that's already been done, and I think that's something, you know, we're very keen as Cornwall Council to talk to towns and parishes about what services you might be willing to take on our behalf. It's got to be a deal that's right financially for us, but equally it's got to be a deal that's right financially for you.
And also, I had to ring Cornwall Council about something, and the girl said to me, where are you from? And I said, Camelford, and she said, where's that?
That, I have to say, is very unusual because...
What?
That was this year.
Okay, well my apologies for that. Our call centre, I think, is... Now, I'm not going to promise that every call is absolutely perfect, of course I won't, but our call centre is really good. We train our staff hugely. Now, if you had a bad experience, I apologise for that.
I just couldn't believe it.
But we get to sit. Our view is that we shouldn't actually. We don't judge our call centre staff on how quickly they handle calls, because we want you to be able to have your problem, whatever issue you've rung up about, handled ideally by the person who answers the phone. So we're not tying up staff down the line with it. And where they do have to pass it on to somebody else, they pass it on to one person who answers the query.
I got passed to 3 different departments.
That's what we're trying to get rid of. We're trying to get to a situation where you get your answer because it's cheaper in the main, because you don't have to ring back time and time again. So that's what we aim to do, is get people their problem or whatever they've rung up for answered first time by the person who answers the phone. So it is becoming increasingly rare that you get passed from pillar to post. It will still happen.
Do you know what paved the road to ruin?
Good intentions.
No, exactly. But if I don't have good intentions, where am I going to be?
I rang about the pension this week and I got dealt with absolutely spot on very quickly. So, but the other thing what I was going to say is, you talked about getting private companies to pick up the services. Do you really think private companies are going to want the sparse rural areas as well as all the towns?
Well, if we go down, we're not committing to.
No.
If we go down the route of talking to voluntary sectors, charities, private companies about delivering services, then it'll either be a defined service within a defined area, or it'll be a service across the whole of Cornwall. We will make sure we retain the client function, the service control. So we set the rules about what service they must provide, and we keep them to it. I don't want to be in a situation where, because a private company comes in and says, well, it's too expensive to deliver it in Camelford, but it's nice and cheap in Truro, so we'll bid for the Truro bit. No, we're only going to offer the Cornwall-wide thing, unless it's an existing specialist
to monitor that they're actually delivering it in the rural areas.
Absolutely. That's what our contract management team do. They make sure we don't get the aircraft change of specification stuff, but they also make sure that the service we're paying for is the service that's delivered. That's how, although it was an utter disaster for the first 6 weeks, the new waste contract with Corey, which was a shambles for 6 weeks. And that was partly Corey's fault, and that was partly Cornwall Council's fault.
It's the GPSs and the thing as much as anything.
Everything, all the horror stories, that they didn't know where any of the litter bins were, and all that sort of thing. Now, they'll miss the odd bin collection now and again, but does anybody have any real complaints about the service they provide now? I think they do a brilliant service now. And that's partly because our contract management team got in there, and yeah, we should never have been in that position, but they went in there and they worked with them, and they kicked butt, basically, until we got to a situation where Corey were doing what they're paid to do, and we still keep on at them to make sure they don't neglect anything. To a situation where I think we get a really good service from them. I'm going to take a last couple of points, and I'm going to take them from people who haven't spoken before, if that's okay, to start off with.
Very simple one, really. There's a clarification on the holiday home, second home situation.
Yeah.
When you mention that, and you're talking about the full rates, are you talking about the properties that are in fact letting their holiday home? You know, they're doing their fortnight a year, and the rest of the year it's being left to holiday makers. If so, is it better that they pay a business rate instead of the 100%?
There is a definition which I can't remember about when a second home, how many it has to be let to somebody else outside the family to become a holiday home, or indeed when if
18 weeks plus 7 or something.
Whatever it is, yes. But if it's a holiday let, then it pays business rates. And the trouble we've got occasionally is trying to identify what's a holiday let as opposed to a regular house. Because now, because second homes pay full council tax, we have actually, ironically, we have less help in identifying which these houses are. But we're always on the case because we want, not only do we want them to pay business rates, but also we want them to, you know, they've got to pay for their waste collection as well, rather than it being included as part of the residential. So, yeah, it's a tough one, but we're trying to do that. Yeah.
You got some spies out.
Yeah, occasionally. I don't know how you report it, but yeah, if you can let me know.
Well, we have a fraud hotline. Ring the fraud
We
hotline.
do. It's meant to be benefit for it, but we'll take anything. Yeah.
No. It's a general fraud hotline. This is fraud.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Okay. And an email address. Okay. Last 2 points. I had a couple of people wanting to say additional things, but if anybody else who hasn't said anything yet wants to say anything, now's your chance. Okay. 3 people in the back row, and then we're going to have to wrap up. But we'll start over there and go this way.
Let somebody else have it.
My question of you, Alex, because you've done all of these, have you?
Yeah.
Is
Sorry, my shoulder is really aching, but carry on.
So
That's why I'm wrapping my arms around.
in this consultation process, what's been the general themes that have come up from all the locals, all the residents that you've met over the last month or so?
Very different things in different areas. Lots of concern about adult care and support for vulnerable people. In different areas, less so in Truro, but you'd probably expect that, but lots of concern about rural bus services, as we talked about earlier. Some very local issues in Saltash. They're concerned hugely about a youth project called Live Wire, so they made a good case on that. But very different things come out in different places. I don't think I've had one yet where nobody's raised second-home council tax. I'm not going to tell you what else you've missed, but there are things that come back time and time again. But in just about every area, there's been something, either a completely new idea or a different tweak or nuance or whatever, that, you know, this is what I think, to be honest, this is what I think politics should be about. Yes, it's me arguing the toss and explaining what my view is, but I want to listen to hear what other people think. So that it informs what I do when I come to vote, and through the report that Sarah's taking, it hopefully will influence what all the other councillors will say and do when they decide how they vote. They're not necessarily going to make the same decision as I do, but hopefully it will influence them, because that's the point of it, is to understand what people think, even if not just for the next year's budget, but for the budget moving forward, for whatever challenges we might face in the future. So yeah, a whole range of different issues, some very parochial, some more generic. Bus passes is the other thing that's come up everywhere, and can we make people pay for them?
Should be standard charge of quid.
Sadly, you can't, but yeah, but you know, it's a legitimate concern, and it's a good idea. Yeah.
My concern is this consultation process is not really about you finding out what the local people feel and think. This is a way of you putting forward your plans, really, and I just feel that lacks transparency. It's not authentic, and that's my concern about the whole process.
If that's your view, then obviously you're entitled to it. I'm sorry if that's what's come across. I mean, I'll make no apology for the fact that we also want to communicate the challenge, the scale of the challenge we face, whether it's for the next 2 years or whether it's for the next 5 years. There is, I hope you will agree, undoubtedly a huge challenge that we do face.
There's a very clear challenge for the next 2 years, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the period. And I get that you're taking a lot of mileage with regard to that. Yeah. That's what I get. So.
Okay, but I hope I'm not saying to you this is my plan, because I don't think I've set out what my plan is. Because what I want to hear from you is what.
Well, it can't be your personal plan, can it? You're one individual.
Sure, but I don't think we've set out what our plan is as a council. What we've set out is we've got to save £23.9 million next year. That's undoubted. We are 99% certain what the challenge is the year after that. We think we know, you may disagree, we think we know what the challenge is for the coming years beyond that. And we want to understand from people what you think are the priorities, what you think are important, and where you can identify savings. And you, just as other groups, but you've identified some different ones, you have identified some areas that you think we should concentrate on, and that's what I want to feed back, because I think it's wrong for politicians of whatever type to pretend that they know everything, because we don't. So that's why we want to understand more from local residents across Cornwall. If this was a sham, I wouldn't be doing 23 of these meetings. Really, I'd have a social. Well, no, I'm not having a social life. Okay.
Just a thing on devolution. We've just taken on WCs in town. In 3 years' time, your grant fund will stop, which will automatically mean our precept will go up by exactly the same amount, if not more, than your grant aided. Now, is there any way we can have a sloping off of the grant aid? Because to suddenly increase our precept by £6,000, £7,000, £8,000, £9,000 to cover the shortfall is going to be a massive kick to our residents who demand that they stay home to service the visitors, believe it or not.
I can understand that. I can't make you any promise on that. I think, as I said earlier, I think the devolution, handing over the dumping in some cases of public toilets was really badly handled. I think that there wasn't really a clear explanation given as to why this one was going to continue to be funded by Cornwall Council, but this one wasn't. And in some areas, it was just really unclear. In some areas, effectively, Cornwall Council said, yeah, we'll close one and we'll keep one open. And there was a logic to that. But in other areas, it was far from that. And some towns or parishes, like Camelford, like Wilson, we agreed to take them on, and we got a short-term grant. Now, I suppose you could say we knew it was short-term, we knew how long it was going to last for, and we made our own bet. But I think that the whole process in this instance was badly handled, and I've got a meeting next week with the leader to talk about this, to talk about what we might do to see if we can put it right. Now, I'm not making any promises.
You've got 3 years to sort it out.
But I do understand.
Facebook today for you from a visitor there.
But I do understand that it is something that has genuine concern to it, and we're looking at it. Because now, in some areas we don't have 3 years, but you know, I think it is something that needs to be sorted. Okay. Listen, I started off by saying that we would have a straw poll at the end of that council tax. So I'm going to offer you 4 options. There are more, but I'm using the same 4 options at every meeting, so bear with me on this. The first option is a council tax freeze next year. You would pay the same Cornwall Council tax as you do at the moment, The government will give us a grant to mitigate some of the effects, but in addition to that 23.9 million we talked about, we will have to make an additional £2 to £2.5 million of cuts next year. That's option one. Option two is the budget we've talked about, £23.9 million of cuts, so you pay a little more on your council tax. Okay, that's option two. Option three is a rise of 5% in council tax, so you pay more, but we have to make fewer cuts. 17 million instead of 23.9, so we can save some services that we would otherwise lose. But we have to go through the referendum with all the risks and the costs involved. But if you think that we can win that, and you think that's the right option, that's option
That's £1 million, isn't it?
Option four is my courageous 19% rise in council tax. Your council tax would go up by about £240 on a Band D property. We'd have to go through the referendum and so on, but there would be no cuts next year. So that's option four. Okay, so those are the four options.
Option three, by how much would it do?
5% rise in council tax.
Real term rise is 3% then.
I can't remember if you've got your ready reckoner with you, how much it will cost.
We have.
About
First time we've had to use it.
About £88 on a Band D property.
£62.
£62 on a Band D property. Okay, so those are the four options. If you would like to vote for option one, the council tax freeze, but the extra cuts, please raise your hand. No votes. Okay. If you would like to vote for option two, the 1.97% rise and the £23.9 million of cuts, please raise your hand. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Thank you. If you'd like to vote for option 3, a 5% rise, fewer cuts, referendum with all the risks involved, please raise your hand. 2 votes. Thank you. If you'd like to vote for option 4, the 19% rise in council tax, referendum, big rise in council tax, but no cuts at all next year.
Guaranteed loss of the referendum.
Your view. If that's your view, please raise your hand. No votes. Okay. That's just a straw poll. We just want to understand across Cornwall. We can now add up all the figures, and I don't have them in my head, but we can add up all the figures and understand from the thousands or more people we've talked to what the overall view is. And we'll feed that. It'll be one small factor into what we feed into our budget discussions. But thank you very much. If you have any final thoughts or something strikes you on the way home, please email haveyoursay@cornwall.gov.uk. Tomorrow evening I'm doing the last presentation. It's for the business people and the voluntary organisations and the other public sector organisations we do business with. It's webcast. So it's at 6:30 and you can watch it online and hear what lots more people have to say. But if you've ever got any thoughts that you want to feed in, efficiencies, examples of bad callback practice, examples of bad call centre, whatever you've got, please let us know and we'll be glad to try and help sort it out. Thanks for coming and have a safe journey home. We'll try. That's the point of coming out, to try and find out.